So Black Mirror is a British series written by Charlie Brooker, which consists of 7 seasons so far and including the Bandersnatch movie, 34 episodes in total. Each episode has a different director, different casting and different stories, which to me made it easier to finally go and watch the entirety of it, since it's more like short movies without having to wait for another season following a singular plot. For those who are living under a rock, Black Mirror has become one of the quintessential series on depicting a dystopian sci-fi world that is not really that far away from reality, because it's not really that much about the advanced technology itself, but more about the way people use said technology, how dependent they are from it, or how they take advantage of certain situations in ways where human emotion or substance becomes a secondary aspect. With a ton of social commentary and a slew of tension, dark and heavy parts, this has become a series that for the most part I find absolutely phenomenal. Even in some of its worst moments, there have only been a few episodes for which I didn't care for all that much. But for the most part, this series was way more thought-provoking and way more imaginative than what I initially thought, with some groundbreaking concepts and the fear that some of them don't seem that far away from our current reality. So in my ranking, I'm gonna start with what I consider the worst episode, going all the way to the top at number 1. There are going to be some spoilers, not too major stuff, but only where I feel it's essential to get a point across. But still, it's better if you have watched the series to get an understanding of the concepts, which I strongly recommend. In certain ways it exceeded my expectations, considering its popularity and the downgrade of the later seasons, but I was really pleased overall. And also, obviously, this is just my opinion. Keep in mind that I got into the series completely blind, meaning that outside of close friends of mine recommending me the series and telling me that certain episodes were not that great, I had absolutely no idea which of those episodes are considered the best, which ones the worst, so I got into Black Mirror with no biases or predispositions, and I'm only going to mention the popular general opinion very few times where I would feel it's necessary. Okay, so starting off at the bottom of this list is going to be the episode that I've seen it's considered by most the worst in the series, and I totally get why. That episode is Mazy Day. I still do not dislike this episode, I just think it's mediocre and a little bit disappointing because I see the potential to it. Having an episode about paparazzis and how celebrities have their privacies constantly violated is an interesting subject to comment about, and I like how it doesn't show a technologically advanced version of this phenomenon, but rather an old school 80s aesthetic, sort of reflecting on a glaring issue as not something new, but something that has been an issue for decades at this point. And as the episode would go on, it was certainly not one of the most memorable, but it kept my attention. And then there's this bizarre twist towards the end that came out of nowhere, and I don't really know if I missed any hint, but it made absolutely no sense. So apparently there was supposed to be a spin-off series called Red Mirror that had a more supernatural tone, but ended up being part of the Black Mirror series. I do not have an issue with Black Mirror taking a supernatural direction if it's executed properly, but this was like one of the worst and most amateurish twists I can think of. It's dumb, it makes no sense, and ruins what I consider to be an episode that was at least passable, but this was not it. At number 33 is going to be the other Red Mirror episode, Demon 79. Way better execution than Mazy Day, but it's not that low because of its supernatural aspect. I just didn't really care about the plot that much. The comedic bits, which became more and more common with latest seasons, didn't really land here. The whole premise of having to make 3 sacrifices to prevent the end of the world was just really uninteresting, and it felt kinda long. The performances and bonding of Anjana Vassam and Papa Esiedu were quite charming. It was a cool episode, but pretty forgettable for the most part. Next up at number 33 is Betenoir. The 7th season had some great moments, but this particular episode was extremely forgettable for me. It is a bit of a mind twister, which I like since reality for our protagonist Maria seems to be altered in unexplainable ways, in ways that make you look delusional to anyone else around you. This phenomenon seems to occur the moment the enigmatic former schoolgirl Verity joins the company she works at, and the way the story unfolds just made me feel pretty neutral and meh. The twists and explanations with a piece of technology they present to us at the end was just lukewarm. It was really intriguing at the beginning and the payoff was not all that satisfying. Also not a fan with the way they decided to end this episode. It has its interesting aspects, but to me there are so many other episodes that are executed in a much more gratifying way. At number 31 I have Metalhead. This is definitely one of the more experimental episodes, filmed in black and white and having a distinct feeling that makes it stand out as an episode and make an impression compared to the rest. My issue with this episode is that the experimentation is to the extent where the episode is just really vague. Just a tiny bit of additional context will give an understanding of the situation we're in, something that in my opinion multiple other episodes have pulled off successfully. Being a mostly visual episode with a big absence of dialogue, it follows a group of survivors in a post-apocalyptic landscape being hunted by a vicious robotic dog. There is a lot of tension that in some cases feels a bit forced with the overemphasized horror type strings, and also a bit of an inconsistency of how this killing machine operates and how to deal with it. It turns into a horror chase sequence for which I don't care for that much, and it's one of the shorter episodes and this one left me wanting more out of it. A bit of more world building, just something not this vague. From an artistic standpoint, this is a really well made episode that I was hoping I would like more, but the episode ends and just feels kinda empty. At number 30 is going to be Hated in the Nation. This is the very first episode that I saw and felt like it overstayed its welcome. For the vast majority I feel like the episodes are extremely well paced, but even the smaller ones were feeling packed with a ton of great content to them. But Hated in the Nation was just adding layers upon layers of sequences to the point where the end result was somewhat underwhelming. So what I really like about this episode is that for me it has some of the most tense and most horrifying sequences out of the entire series. I am super afraid of flying bugs, so the idea of robot bees being hacked and sending a signal to your location in order for them to insert your body and kill you is like peak terrifying dystopian scenario for me. I also really like the commentary behind death threats, how easy it is for us to write something online, but in this universe it actually has consequences. The people receiving the death threats actually die, and instead of making people back off from the trend, it actually enforces a campaign where people choose who is to die next, based on who has the most death threats under his name. Outside this great concept and the dichotomy of morals, the story is mostly treated as a mystery case, which is just okay, but takes away from the tension since the whole hacking aspect is just them trying to solve the inevitable, and then it shoots itself in the foot when the story leads to death of everyone who participated in the death threat campaign, with the death toll reaching hundreds of thousands if I'm not mistaken, a kind of a ridiculous way to cap off the hacker's intent by making everyone complicit. Also the end with the sidekick detective fighting the hacker on her own leaves the case open-ended and up to interpretation, and it really adds nothing as a sequence. So it's because of some choices with the story towards the end and slow pacing that make me put this episode this low down the list, sadly, because some of its ideas were really fascinating. At number 29 is Rachel, Jack and Ashley 2. This is the first episode that I was aware of from Black Mirror back in the day because it had Miley Cyrus in it and I listened to her single as Ashley O when it was released, which by the way is a remixed alternate version of Head Like a Hole by 9 Inch Nails, which I found pretty interesting. So this episode is a commentary of heinous label and manager practices in the music industry, taking a toll on an artist's creative process, and how celebrities can be easily replaced with AI versions of themselves just in expense of keeping the general public invested. Something that is not far away with our reality, with how AI stands as a huge obstacle to artists and creators nowadays. This up-and-coming pop star Ashley O, played by Miley Cyrus, conceals her true emotions as she plays this cheerful persona on stage and TV that also leads to an interactive robot toy for fans as a way to interact with their favorite artists, as a way to further enhance the idea of artificial emotions replacing real ones. I like this as a concept, and what I really like about Black Mirror is that it has all of those cutting-edge, unique and intriguing ideas, and I was hoping that this is something we would see on this subject matter. But unfortunately, it felt like a really basic way of telling that story, and sort of distancing itself from what has made Black Mirror episodes so striking. This feels more like a work of someone that tries to imitate Black Mirror rather than a Black Mirror episode itself, so it really does lose its potential. At the second half, the episode decides to become more of like a comedy, which I didn't really mind, and it was actually kinda funny. Like, I enjoyed some of these sequences. It's also one of those episodes that has a good ending, but it's a bit of a more cliché type of ending where the rebellious girl gets what she wants against an industry that mistreated her. It's a bit juvenile in its execution, but I still found it quite entertaining. Just not enough though in order to consider this one of the better episodes. Next up at number 28 is another episode from season 7 that I didn't really care for that much, Hotel Reverie. This is another one of those romance type episodes which I don't mind at all. This just happens to be the one that made the least impression on me. So this is about a remake of a very classic vintage movie in which the actress plays the main male role in a heavily immersive setting where the technology of Redream can put you right into the movie as if you are part of the filmmaking process. The only thing Brandy, the protagonist, has to do is to follow the script, otherwise she will be trapped in a simulation and her real self will not be able to wake up. But things go off the rails and we see how the artificial characters in the movie react when that immersion on being part of a script is broken and the rules are not followed. It's one of those episodes that borders between the realms of fiction and reality and whether artificial parts of ourselves hold any value, and this turns into a romantic story which is just okay. On a technical standpoint, I think that this episode is really well made. I really like the contrast between the full color world and the black and white movie setting, but other than that, Hotel Reverie was just an episode that felt decent, and that's about it. Now we get into the episodes that I consider to be pretty good, but not amazing, starting at number 27 with Smitherines. So this is about a cab driver who takes a person hostage working at the company Smitherine, a massive social media company, and after getting a lot of traction from the police and the media, he promises to leave the hostage free until they get him to speak directly with the CEO of the company. This is one of the episodes that builds a ton of tension, and Andrew Scott's performance really steals the show. It's one of the best in the series, even if it's a bit over the top. Now I'll go on full-on spoilers with this one to get into my point. So the reasoning behind this action was one that I got a feeling was not really worth it, going over this much trouble in order to tell your story to a CEO who's probably not going to listen to you. And while I didn't see that twist coming, I still wasn't really that satisfied. So basically he got a notification on the Smitherine app while he was driving, popped his phone, gets into a car crash and his wife dies. And he feels complicit about it and wanted to tell this to the CEO. So we waited for 1 hour of tension, which mind you, pretty good tension, but only just to make a commentary about people being glued to their phones and social media addiction, which is not a shocking revelation in any way, and also, realistically speaking, companies cannot just be held accountable over people's responsibility when using an application while driving, for example. And yes, it's not like Chris, our protagonist, was expecting any sort of justice out of all of it. I know that, I just wasn't feeling it. That being said, the final sequence on the credits is one of the best endings in the entirety of Black Mirror in my opinion. The cops shoot. It leaves it up to our interpretation whether they shot Chris or the hostage, and everyone around the world just looked at their phones for the news update for just a few seconds and went on with their day, as if nothing really happened, and Chris proved to anyone exactly his point. So yeah, one part of me really likes the episode, another part of me not so much. I'm on the fence with this one, but still overall pretty intense and engaging. At number 26 is another episode from season 5, Striking Vipers. This is possibly the weirdest episode of Black Mirror for me. Like it ended, and I really didn't know how to really feel about it. So with gaming, we constantly see ways to make the experience more immersive and realistic. And this is what Striking Vipers tackles upon, a fighting game series where its new installment goes beyond VR. Your entire body is inside the simulation, taking the form of the fighter you choose. Two bodies reunite and get themselves immersed into this new experience, where there's no limit to what they do, so instead of fighting, they fall in love with each other and have sex in the simulation as the game characters. This ends up having consequences in their everyday lives, and they wonder if they truly feel attached to each other outside the game world. While this could be a great commentary about over-affection to fictional characters and creating immersive worlds to the point where it detaches us further from reality, the approach it ended up taking is interesting to say the least. I just don't see how this fighting game, for example, that is meant to be programmed to fight, can literally just let you do any other activity, just like sex. It would be another thing if they would market an interactive sex game, an industry that can be critiqued with the ways it operates and reinforces loneliness. But it was still pretty interesting to see a person with a woman and child getting so invested into this interactive experience to the point that it messes with his everyday life. And the way it ended was pretty dark. Did not really expect it to go that way, so it gets points for subverting my expectations and showing the complexities of human relationships. At number 25 is what I consider to be by far the most underappreciated episode of Black Mirror, and that is the Waldo Moment. Considering the current political sphere where memes and internet culture can play a role to determine a young person's voting choice, the Waldo Moment is possibly the most relatable episode, which in a sense sort of became a sad reality. And for this being aired in 2013, a bit terrifying how ahead of its time it was. That being said, there are a couple of things that hold this episode back from being even better in my opinion. For starters, I love the idea of a comedian with a crude sense of humor behind an animating cartoon getting mixed into politics while having a heavily apolitical stance, doesn't want to get involved in politics, but this apathy towards any political agenda is what garners the attention of the youth who see Waldo as a character who just speaks his mind out loud and is in panels only to mock the other political opponents. This leads to Waldo getting into the electoral campaign to run for office, and I also really like how when after the person behind Waldo gets replaced, nothing changes to Waldo's image, enhancing even further the idea that this persona can be easily replaceable. This is a great critique on how youth loses all hope on politics, and the lack of education in this regard can lead to a wrong decision making on voting a candidate whose centrist point of view only empowers the right. And I like how the episode showed that despite the efforts from TV executives and such, Waldo still got second, leading to the win of the Conservative Party, tanking every attempt for progressive parties to come victorious. Here are the issues that I have with the episode. And it doesn't have to do with Waldo being an annoying persona. It just wasn't believable enough that this persona with this immature attitude would get this far to the polls or anything other than a joke that would be forgotten in a matter of days. While the episode makes an attempt to showcase the traction and the way TV executives and management handle the rise of fame, the underlying problem of centrism in the political sphere is a missed opportunity, and so the execution feels immature at times, as if everyone suddenly subscribes to this apolitical stance breaking chains, which is not how politics operate. And also the episode would be even better if it had a bit more of a focus on the person behind the Waldo persona, Jamie, trying to break free and actually be recognized for who he really is as a person, which happens but not explored that much. And the ending is just kinda empty. The episode is one of the shorter ones, and I wish there was more to it. So yeah, from what I've seen, overhated episode, but definitely had the potential for something even better. At number 24 we have Yulogy. This is probably one of the saddest Black Mirror episodes, but not that much in a dark way. Instead, this is probably the only episode of Black Mirror where the advanced technology presented is being used for good use. Now, obviously, depending on who you ask, you can argue that all of the technology presented in the series is meant for good, and it's the human error that leads to those despicable scenarios. So seeing this more beneficial side was a really nice change of pace. So the technology of this episode lets you relive your memories based on your photographs, getting inside them the moment they happened. Philip gets to partake in a eulogy for his former girlfriend Carol, and he tries to remember her face from memories of the past reflected of photos he took. But the problem is that all of the photos with Carol in them have her face cut or just not a frame, which is due to a tough breakup. This reflection on hardships and past mistakes and trying to forget that past and not learn from your mistakes is the main gist of the story. Now the main complaint that I have with this episode and why it's not even higher on the list is that I didn't find the connection that much powerful at the beginning. Considering that this significant other is someone you had strong emotions for, but can't even be able to remember her face, but apart from that, let's say that it did its purpose to showcase that Philip did everything in its power to forget. At first glance, I didn't get the feeling that this person was on that huge significance. I think it would be more effective if Philip was not this defensive and more upfront with his relationship with Carol from the get-go. Because with the reveals that happened at the second half, I was just wondering why did we not get to that point across sooner? Why did we not showcase this significance on the first half, whose pacing is kinda slow, but it pays off at the end with what I consider to be one of the greatest, most marvelous and beautiful endings in the entire series. The emotions, the cinematography, the music, it just pulls your heartstrings. So as a whole, I just wish it was executed differently in the first half, but at least the ending is flawless. At number 23 is possibly going to be my most controversial opinion. It's Sanjin Nebero. Now, this doesn't mean that I dislike this episode, and keep in mind, I got with no biases, so when I saw that Sanjin Nebero is actually considered one of the best episodes by a lot of you, I was surprised. Apparently a lot of you love this episode, and I can sort of see why, since it's a really beautiful and heartfelt love story between two women, and it's really well done. But I really didn't feel that this episode did that much in order to make it stand out compared to anything else we got prior to this episode. So for me it really took a while to get me invested into their love story and sense this bonding and this connection, and I feel like other episodes later down the line have achieved this with a better pace. I really like the overall aesthetic and how we go from an 80s disco to a rapidly changing environment with more and more recent technology, but our protagonists remain the same age. This is one of the mind twists that caught my attention. The reveal of the technology was unexpected and a really neat idea, but I have sort of mixed feelings how they went about it. So our two protagonists in the real world are close to their deathbed, and in the nursing homes they have the ability to simulate a dream place. That is Sanjin Nebero, in which they live their younger life the way they want, exploring their passions in ways they didn't in the real world. One of the aspects the episode touches upon is that you can choose when your real self dies to have your simulated self live for eternity in the place of your dreams, in our case, Sanjin Nebero. My main issue with the episode is that I consider the idea of immortality one of the most terrifying concepts, trapped inside a place where you can't die, even if it's the one of your dreams, even if it is with a person you want to live your eternity with. They could have made something really bleak with this concept, and everything up to this point was really bleak with Black Mirror, but instead it was the first episode at the time that had sort of a good ending. While that fear of immortality is being explored, it didn't touch upon it as much, and so for me the ending was a bit of a disservice to what was otherwise a really cool concept. Even with those minor complaints, I still consider this to be a good episode, just not as impactful as anything else this series has to offer, which has a lot of good episodes. Number 22 is going to be Men Against Fire. This was one of the most gruesome and most brutal episodes in the series. A group of militarized personnel have to protect villagers from the threat posed by creatures called roaches, which appear to us like mutated, horrifying creatures. As it goes on, we discover the true nature behind those supposed creatures, why they are killing them, and with its revelation, the final moments become quite thought-provoking, which to an extent, it's not unexpected to deem militarized authorization and conflicts as something we must strive to reduce and downright prohibit. I knew the episode was gonna go there, but it goes the extra mile with dehumanization, race, ethnic cleansing, the psychology of soldiers being brainwashed in order to not suffer from trauma for the atrocities they commit. This episode is mainly this low because it didn't have anything particular to really stand out, whether it's with performances or with the pacing or the technical aspect. Also, the parts with the good dreams being programmed to keep the mentality of soldiers in check felt more of like an afterthought. But apart from that, I really like this episode and the way it slowly unfolds its purposes towards the end. Number 21 is Crocodile. One of the darkest and most intense episodes in my opinion that really got me more and more at the edge of my seat as it would go on. So the technology presented over here does not really feel all that original. It seems like we've seen it play out in different ways prior to this episode and also being executed in a better way. It's about an investigator using a device that can manifest your memories and show the full picture. The case of the investigator is just about a minor traffic accident, Mia Nolan, that gets involved as a witness that has to hide a much bigger secret. This performance by Andrea Riseborough is, in my opinion, one of the greatest in the series, as we witness this downward spiral of a person involved in a killing and doing anything in her power to leave no witnesses behind, even if that means having to kill anyone in the process that might be a potential witness, just committing the perfect crime by going to this insane killing spree. This whole paranoia is reflected in a very intense way the more the episode would go on, and I find this its most interesting aspect. There might not be a lot to really mention about the story itself, it's not one of the most standout episodes, but the whole execution is pretty fascinating, especially towards the end and the ridiculous way she gets caught. At number 20 is Be Right Back, one of the sadder and more devastating episodes about human relationships and coping with loss. So when Martha loses her lover Ash, she gets introduced to this cutting-edge technology that simulates the way Ash talked and behaved. Despite her doubts at first, Martha gets more and more invested to keep in touch with this artificial version of Ash, even upgrading from messages and voice chats to a full-on android body resembling him, as if he never left. But the complexities of human emotions make the relationship with this artificial version of your past lover not feel this natural, and those complexities are where the episode truly shines. My biggest gripe with the episode was with its start. Ash dies too soon and didn't give enough time to build the relationship between the two. Just give something to really convince me that this particular relationship truly mattered, that she would go this much out of her way to bring him back. One reasoning I can give behind this is that at the beginning she had this relationship for granted, thinking she won't lose him that quickly, and that the whole process with the technology was just out of curiosity at first, trying to see how much further this whole thing could go. But I do think if the relationship was more fleshed out at the beginning, it would make the loss and the actions afterwards a bit more gratifying. But apart from that, the ending is pretty heavy and her dependence on her late lover comes to a test and shatters her personal life. Really powerful episode. At number 19 is the sequel to USS Calister Into Infinity. I don't really think that this episode needed a sequel, but at least it was a really good successor to what made the first episode so gratifying, and manages to reach to a great conclusion at the end, revealing more stuff and building up to an already great concept without feeling out of place. Into Infinity follows up where the intergalactic adventure left off at the end of the first episode, with the simulated versions of the company crew reaching the awareness to people in the outside world. We also get a further explanation of the DNA cloning device Robert Daly had in his home and how he acquired it, and that a cloned version of Robert Daly is at the core of the game, expanding the universe in real time for an eternity. Lots of neat ideas, great execution once again with the environments and the designs. But what I liked the least about this episode was the way they went with Walton. We knew that Walton in the real world, being the head of the company, was an asshole, and the first episode showed us his human side with his artificial clone. But right here, Walton in real life is so cartoonishly evil. The way he values his company over literally everything else, even the well-being of his employees, made for some sequences that were kinda dumb, and also a failure on some comedic scenes where it just didn't land. This comes in great contrast with the way Robert Daly was portrayed, as this closeted person whose repressed emotions and treatment created this villain in the world he built for himself, which made for what I consider to be one of the most well-written characters in the entire series. Even the way they went with him in this episode was great, showing that even the clone of himself in the core of the game was about to snap and go to the habits of his real self. So while it made it that more satisfying seeing Walton getting what he deserved, I didn't like the way his character was written here. Apart from that, great continuation of the formula of the first USS Calister. Kristen Melotti as Nanette Cole is once again phenomenal in this one, and once again a great questioning for the value of artificial lives in one of the most action-packed and enjoyable episodes in the series. At number 18 is Plaything, which shows kids that's in the same universe with Bandersnatch, and the story happens after the events of that episode. So this is once again about an interactive game breaking the norms of what would be considered a game for the 90s where this takes place. This game is about those creatures called throngs, whose code expands and adapts based on your actions with them. Cameron Walker gets heavily attached to this revolutionary design to the point where he serves his life to these artificial forms of life, understanding their language based on the sounds they make, and the episode certainly goes places. The ending was pretty weird, the way the throngs get access to the entire social network. It's not really explained what the end goal is supposed to be, but I didn't really mind it the way it ended. It was a pretty intense episode that questions the attachment that we get with fictional characters or creatures, what value we seek from them, whether it takes the form of caring or torturing them. I just didn't like the character of DC Icano, the interrogator that was extremely arrogant, hostile, and didn't want to cooperate with a prisoner in his desires, which is not how interrogations work. Apart from that, love the performances, love the idea behind it and the world they built within the game, and while it's not one of the most fulfilling episodes, I still liked it a lot. Halfway towards the list at number 17 is Black Museum. Just like with White Christmas that we're going to see higher on this list, this is another episode with more than one story attached to it, where all of the technologies presented get to come together for a big twist. And man, this was one of the greatest twists in the whole series. Like, this got so dark, the more it would go on, it was really twisted. So this museum showcased a series of artifacts with technological advancements that were later deemed illegal to use. It gives a glimpse of how those devices were used, like the one at the beginning where the doctor could feel any patient's pain and instantly be able to recognize where the pain comes from, but ended up making the doctor getting turned on and seeking for more pain. There is also a device that lets the consciousness of a person, in the instance of our story, one in a coma, being inside your brain at all times, so that you don't have to lose touch with them. This seemed like a great idea, but it quickly shows its massive downsides. And the most twisted one was at the end, with a digital copy of a death row inmate that was designed for keeping in touch with the grieving family, but was used as a torture method for the gratification of visitors pulling the switch and the inmate reliving the electrocution process again and again. The issue that I have with these stories is that they were just treated as anthologies, and while the concepts were interesting, I didn't feel that they built that much upon those foundations, like they did with White Christmas, for example. And so I wasn't really liking the pacing of this episode, but at least the final sequence ties everything together in a really clever and unexpected way, and this is what saves this from being lower in the list. Overall, a really solid episode. We are past the halfway point, and these are the episodes that I consider really good. And at number 16, it's possibly going to be controversial for how much I enjoyed Johnny Zoful. Despite it being one of the more comedic episodes, and this is not what you see Black Mirror for, I think that in this case the comedy worked really well in its favor. Same with a semi-gore ending, which is kinda rare to get with a series, but once again, this felt really well put together. In an era where vlogging becomes more and more common for ordinary people to showcase to everyone their everyday lives, I love the concept of this episode where every person gets to have their own show played in real time by AI versions of actors playing their roles, even in very intimate and personal occasions in which the actors having signed those contracts might not actually want to get involved with this being in their image. But because ordinary lives can be pretty boring and mundane, the programs over-exaggerate what actually happens, giving an extra spice to make them look despicable, because this is what garners attention. Love the commentary about breach of privacy and how media filters negative content as the forefront of discussion and interaction. I guess that considering the concept and what it tries to achieve, if it wasn't this sarcastic and went for a more serious tone, it would probably be even higher on this list. But even with what we got, I'm pretty pleased, and I think that the tone simply distracts from what I consider to be one of the most underappreciated episodes of Black Mirror. At number 15 is Playtest, one of those episodes that you can categorize as a horror one. An American traveler gets to test the new revolutionary idea of a large gaming company for a horror game that is programmed to present to you fears based on what you are afraid the most and triggering traumatic experiences. And the main thing that we see being tackled upon, and for lots of us I believe it's a terrifying scenario, is memory loss. Soon we get to really question what is reality and what is fiction, and this is a question that we see being raised up until the end. The episode just constantly throws twists at you to the point where it becomes overwhelming. Like, come on, are we in reality now? Are we still in the game? No, we're still in the game, but what about now? Nope, still in the game. That whole mind-bending twist was just a tad bit too much, but at least the twist at the end, that whole sequence actually only lasted less than a second, is really twisted. Kind of like how in dreams and nightmares that actually last way less than what we actually feel. It played with some really powerful and dark ideas, and it was pretty well executed and quite intense. Number 14 is the very first Black Mirror episode, the one that started it all, the National Anthem, which, what a way to start a series. While I do understand the criticisms of being a really gross episode in comparison to basically a lot of others, I won't go as far as to say to skip it. So basically, Princess Susanna of the royal family is kidnapped, and if they want to set her free, Prime Minister Michael Callow needs to have sexual intercourse with a pig broadcasted on live television for everyone to see. What a bold first episode. Now I personally do not mind the nature of this episode, since I'm pretty used to grossed out stuff. I find this a really fascinating concept, which goes to show how people in the modern age have this much exposure to disturbing material that we have become extremely desensitized to violence and disturbing content to an alarming degree. The general public was interested to see this actually happen, and what I like about this episode is that a big portion of it focused on how all of the politicians were trying to find a way to prevent this from happening, trying to find who is behind this, how the polls on whether the Prime Minister should do this heinous act would start to shift as new information would come, and the handling of all of this, the panic, the negotiations, the shifts of general opinions were all handled in a surprisingly pleasant way that got me instantly hooked on the series, because the execution was really well done and had more to it than what I would imagine. It's a really intense episode that constantly had me at the edge of my seat. I think it was brilliant. At number 13 is going to be Hank the DJ, one of the most emotionally powerful and dystopian episodes reflecting on the current dating scene and the alarming percentages of loneliness and lack of socialization. In a universe where social cues, dating and relationships are deemed impossible without the aid of technological advancements, Frank and Amy partake in this new dating program that puts an expiration date to any relationship until it finds the ideal one, which can go from just a couple of hours to years, where you can be stuck with someone you don't want to, but you can't really question it because the technology and service provided to you knows best in order to find the ideal pair for you. These logics behind the way the program operates make Frank and Amy question its legitimacy, who then try to find if there is a way to cheat the system. I find this not only to be one of the most imaginative but also one of the most intense episodes from start to finish. I really like the idea behind it, how it's executed, and it does have a really shocking ending that makes the whole concept behind this technology that much more intense and dystopian. I really like this episode. At number 12 is Nosedive, the first episode of season 3, and it is quite something. Now, I am a person that loves rating stuff, even since I was a kid when it comes to music, and now I find multiple sites to rate music, movies, video games, books. In a sense, it has become part of our life. So what if there was a choice to be able to put a ranking to every person around you? And based on the average rating of a person, this can play a huge role to your social status and can even prevent you from certain things if you don't meet the criteria based on your rating. This is an episode where human substance just boils down to a simple rating system, as if we're all just objects devoid of any meaningful human interaction. Everything becomes so fake and so artificial, and that is shown with Lacey Pound, played by Bryce Dallas Howard, who in my opinion has one of the most iconic performances in the entire series. A woman who tries everything in her power to show sympathy to everyone, be on good terms with everyone, especially in higher circles, so that she can boost her score. But things end up taking a nosedive, as we can see that only a few mistakes are enough to trigger a downward spiral in which you can't really come back. The final scene with Lacey's speech crashing her friend's wedding party was one of the most iconic scenes for me. I absolutely love it, and I also love her final interaction, which felt the very first time where we get a sincere actual human interaction without having to worry about any consequence that can come through a rating system, one she was so dependent on for the entirety of the episode. Really cool way to end this, and the overall process and the concept it's built upon showed a heavily dystopian universe that was really well thought out. At number 11 is 15 Million Merits, one of those episodes that really defines Black Mirror to its core. With one of the most imaginative and dystopian environments in the entire series, this is another episode that takes human substance and reduces it as characters that strive to take points. A huge portion of those points can go for a participation to a talent show, which as we see might lead to different paths than what they wanted to actually achieve. Did I add that every one of the people in this program or experiment or whatever you want to call it get random ad pop-ups for which they lose points if they want to skip them, and some of these might even be porn ads. This is an extraordinary episode that shows the exploitation from TV shows and the over-the-top attitude that we see from the judges who are behind this thing is in line with the ridiculousness of the environment that is presented to us. A big portion of this episode is the protagonist believing in Abby's ability as a singer, and it's a bit slow-paced, but as it goes on, it becomes pretty disturbing and making a clever use of everything that has been presented to us that leads to some heavily emotional and powerful scenes. The final speech of Daniel Kaluuya as Bing has so much passion to it, it is undoubtedly one of the most iconic scenes the entire series has to offer. One of the episodes that does start slow but it hooks you up and makes for an overall great experience. And we're at the top 10, starting off with the first episode of USS Calister. This episode gives a very nice first impression, with the color contrast being different from the very bleak atmosphere that was present in the previous 3 seasons, with a massive multiplayer online game set in a universe similar to Star Trek, that is really revolutionary and has led to a new employee working on the company who is fond of the vision behind this game. But things are not as good as they might seem, since one of the founders of the company, Robert Daly, takes DNA samples and makes copies of his employees, and the other founder and makes clones of themselves in his game, where he is the captain of the crew and has the power to do whatever he pleases with them. Robert Daly is for me an incredible villain, a closeted, sympathetic person on the outside world that is completely psychotic and twisted in his own fantasy world, as we see that he has the ability for some intense torturous methods, like making you gasp for air to breathe, but since you cannot die in the digital world, he can let you at this state for all eternity if he pleases. That's insane. Nanette Cole, the new employee, also has her DNA sample taken, and she is cloned to the game as a new crewmate and tries to do everything in her power to get in contact with the outside world and find a way to get out of this place they're trapped in. The way they went with it was a sequence that wasn't really my favorite, but still, for the most part, it was a pretty iconic episode, one of the best casting of the series and a breath of fresh air for its stylistic change with a more vibrant tone to it. At number 9, I have Lock Henry. One of the things that is really interesting about Black Mirror is that if you come to really think of it, the series doesn't really have to do with technology itself taking over our lives. It's about people, how we let technology take over our lives, how dependent we are, and how there's this fascination for human error and wrongdoing to be in full display. I don't think there's a better episode that gets this point across than Lock Henry. An episode which you might see, and because you think of Black Mirror and sci-fi dystopia, you may not see the connection at first glance. And because of taking the concept of just VHS tapes, old technology, and making it fit with its bleak tone and creepy atmosphere of Black Mirror, this is what makes this to me such a standout episode. A young couple travels to a Scottish village where they try to shoot a documentary. But it seems that there is a shocking local story about a series of killings that happened in the past, which led to a huge absence of tourists in the village, and they look at the story and think that this sounds more juicy and a better idea for a documentary than what they had in mind previously. This episode is a phenomenal look on true crime documentaries and the question of how ethical it is to bring up such tragic and shocking stories that may be traumatic to witnesses, only to be used for further attention and become monetizable. I was not really all that hooked at first, but once I saw where this was going, I became more and more invested, and I really liked the way they handled it. And that ending, oh my god, this has to be one of the darkest endings in the series. That twist I did not see coming, it made this whole experience just that more shocking. My jaw was on the floor. Probably underappreciated because it might not feel like a Black Mirror episode at first glance, but the choice of having a non-fictional environment was a smart move to showcase how the whole nature of true crime documentaries and the ethics behind it, it's an actual problem. It's not something that we should prevent from leading to a dystopian future, it is already happening. I really like this episode. At number 8 is Shut Up and Dance. This might be the most intense Black Mirror episode. It had me at the edge of my seat the entire time, and it's also one of those episodes that doesn't rely on technological advancements of a dystopian future. This happens now and was happening years ago when this episode aired. Privacy is something that gets constantly violated in the internet age, and someone can be watching you at all times. This is what happens with Kenny, who gets hacked and his webcam starts recording without him noticing. Soon he gets a message from an anonymous user to do whatever they tell him, otherwise they're going to spread everywhere the video they took of him jerking off to porn. The orders they give him become more and more outlandish as the episode goes on, testing his limits of how far he can go, alongside with other people that are getting threatened by the same anonymous user or users of deeply personal situations that they don't want to get leaked to their friends or family or workplace. This episode goes places. It gets super dark and disturbing, and the twist at the end makes this whole process of Kenny going this far with the orders make that much more sense. The only thing that for me is a nitpick that doesn't make this episode phenomenal is that this group didn't target specifically, but it's all over the place, which is a bit unrealistic. Like, one of them might have written something racist, another one went with an escort, and others committed serious crimes. Like, there is an inconsistency with the level of wrongdoings for all of them to be targeted with the same challenges. Other than that, this episode was just downright insane. Love the performances of Alex Lothar and Jerome Flynn, and just the overall vibe was just so heavy, and just seeing things get worse and worse, it was just great. Now, these final episodes in the end of the list I consider amazing. Not 10 out of 10s, but are still some of the better pieces of media I've seen recently. At number 7 is an episode that you might not think it could land this high on the list. That is Archangel. To my surprise, this is not considered to be one of the greatest episodes in the series. Here is what makes this episode so special for me. I believe that one of the most complicated and most difficult things in life is to learn how to become a good parent. On one hand, you don't want to be too overprotective. On the other hand, it's easier than ever before for kids nowadays to be exposed to problematic and negative influences. And finding that line between overprotection and negligence, I believe that the technology that is presented in this episode is something that I'm afraid that this could likely become real in the future. A microchip that lets parents see through the eyes of their child at all times, and even censor anything that might cause stress to the child. Like, I'm pretty sure that you might find someone to tell you that this is actually a good idea. Obviously, as the episode goes on, little Sarah becomes a teenager that wants to live her life on her own, and some of the choices she makes are the product of reacting against the way she was raised, wanting to be independent. I like that the episode doesn't want to just side with the mother or the child, because you see them both do mistakes, and that whole flow of this rising hostility was so organic in its pace that to me really helped elevate this episode and make it such an engaging, heavy and intense ride from start to finish. That ending could have gone in so many different ways, but I can't think of anyone that could be made to satisfy the most people. It's because of those complexities through parenting that for me, watching this series, it was just a matter of time we get an episode with this subject matter. It might not be the most iconic in terms of its performances, but it's one of those that got me thinking for a long time after I saw it. Archangel is one of the most underappreciated episodes of Black Mirror, in my opinion. At number 6 is the special episode or movie, Bandersnatch. For me, this was my introduction to Black Mirror years ago, so this is the only episode whose plot is not like fresh to me. So I personally am a sucker for games that are choice-based and let me choose my own adventure. When I saw that there are games like this, it felt so revolutionary to me, and then I was searching for any title with that feature. So when I learned that Netflix made this concept with an interactive movie that lets you make choices that affect the way the story progresses, I was beyond excited to experience this. This was incredible. Like, this whole interactive process with a movie was an out-of-this-world experience. But outside this sick feature, I really liked the story and the whole enigmatic aura with the characters and setting. Set up in the 80s, a young programmer gets to adapt a crazy novel idea in a game, but as it goes on, what's reality and what's not starts to get questioned. It's a very bizarre episode with fourth wall breaks, unexpected twists, and keeps this constant intensity that the series is known for. What I also really liked about the feature and why I think it works so well is that your choices could lead to some pretty unexpected results compared to what you initially might have in mind. It would be one thing if it put you in a dilemma on what choice is best and expect the outcome, but when it comes to some of the final choices, this story just goes places, it gets ridiculous. This could have easily gone wrong as an idea, but I believe it worked tremendously. Bandersnatch was quite a unique interactive experience that also has a very intriguing story and characters to it. At number 5 is Beyond the Sea, possibly the most depressing and most devastating episode of the series. Also one of the longest that could easily be a movie's length, but doesn't overstay its welcome. The pacing is really good. Set in an alternate 1969, two space marines on a mission that is going to last for years have replicas of themselves back on Earth. They are able to change their consciousness from their actual body in space to the replica on Earth so that they get in touch with their family. But once one of the members, David Ross, has his entire family killed and the replica destroyed, he has nothing to do back to Earth. But Cliff Stanfield gives him the opportunity to use his own link and spend time with his family. You can sort of see where this is going, how David gets more accustomed to it, requesting he would use Cliff's link more and more times. While you sort of see it coming, it doesn't stop it from being an extremely captivating episode. Aaron Paul gives a performance that is beyond outstanding, possibly the best in the series, and the way he changes character when he has to portray David in Cliff's replica, just phenomenal work. Such a heart-wrenching episode with a really dark ending. Next at number 4 is Common People. After the somewhat disappointing seasons 5 and 6 that made fans believe that the series has gone downhill and is never coming back, the first episode of season 7 made a comeback with a heavy hitter. Common People contains the elements that make for a great Black Mirror episode. It's bleak, it's heavy, and goes to this downward spiral in which there is no escape. Amanda falls into a coma and she's at the brink of her life, but there is a revolutionary method that can keep her alive, Rivermind, but at a cost, a literal cost. Rivermind helps her regain her consciousness, but needs more times to sleep so that the systems go on rest mode and recharge. And you can only go within the signal zone. Want to be able to expand the zone? You can simply subscribe to a more expensive package. But she also starts ad-libbing ads in random occasions based on the situation. Want to skip those ads? Subscribe to an even more expensive package. Living under these conditions suddenly becomes a really difficult task, and her husband Mike, trying to take care of her as best as he can, ends up partaking in an online streaming site where you get paid by donators when you do whatever they request you, which might involve from drinking your piss to pulling out your teeth. Brutal and disturbing episode that takes a turn for the worst anytime. Brilliant execution, love the way it implemented all of its key elements to create a powerful impact. And what I also really like about Common People is the way it made me get invested in this loving relationship of Mike and Amanda right from the beginning. This is something that I felt was a bit of an issue with certain episodes lower down the list, where it took a while to really make me feel the connection. But Common People used the right elements with the right pacing to make this relationship feel so organic. And because of that, the impact is even stronger just watching their suffering. A brilliant commentary on what could be tied with healthcare, a right that is not equal for all of us, with people's values being reduced to economic budgets where only the ones able to afford it are worth of survival. At number 3 is White Bear. This episode has the most outstanding plot twist in the series, and one of the most shocking and unexpected in general. The way everything ties together, the way everything makes sense, had my jaw drop on the floor for how carefully crafted and thought out it was. It starts as a really confusing episode, having me raise constant questions every time, and I was worried that this was going to be a pretentious type of episode that wasn't going to explain anything. Victoria wakes up in an apartment and can't remember anything about her life. Everyone around her is just filming and others try to kill her. It becomes this psychological thriller with a ton of tension and action, and has also so many things that just seem really off, that felt like it would take a ton of time explaining. But nothing could have prepared me for what happens on the second half. These revelations were crazy and would just pile up one after another, even at the credit rolls. Without spoiling what really happens, because you really need to experience this episode blind, what I have to say is that this is an outstanding, thought-provoking episode about criminal justice, with how acts like the death penalty are prohibited, but then criminals get to succumb to torture methods that really makes you question if that's really what they deserve, and who's the one looking more psychotic, who is really the perpetrator and who's the victim. This episode just shook me to the core, extremely imaginative, very well made, and full of moral dilemmas. Just go watch this if you haven't. At number 2 is the entire history of you. Despite being one of the shorter episodes, it's filled with so much great content, no filler whatsoever, and just hitting all of the emotionally charged bits one by one. For its time, the concept of this episode was extraordinary, and even if we've seen similar implementations of this formula in some other episodes, nothing really beats this near flawless execution of the entire history of you. A future where every single thing that comes from our POV becomes a memory that we can revisit anytime we want, unless we decide to delete a part of our memory in which neither we or anyone else can watch. This works as an amazing revolutionary technology for those who want to relive great memories, but we quickly get to see the downsides the moment Liam gets increasingly suspicious of his girlfriend Fionn and the way she was looking and talking at her ex in a party. This becomes an obsession where he just rewinds those parts of his memory just to pick any sign that will prove his point, from the way she looks at him to the way she laughs at his jokes. And this obsession starts to really test their relationship, and it progressively gets more and more intense and hard to watch. Being with an implant for the rest of your life and having to worry about this constant breach of privacy of any given moment of your life is just insane. And once again, it is very well crafted, the way it presents this technological advancement and the way its users implement it. What I find really fascinating about this episode is that, considering the idea behind it, they could have easily used it for an investigation case of like a murder or something like a political conflict with classified information, but instead, we only get to see it through the lens of the heavily suspicious man who feels he gets cheated on, showcasing how even in some more minor on quotes cases, someone can become heavily obsessed, lose track of reality, and lead to a dark cycle that is hard to escape. So yeah, I absolutely love how it takes a story of love and jealousy and uses this crazy concept to portray the fall of a relationship. Incredible episode. And at number 1 is a pretty obvious choice. It's considered for lots one of the best Black Mirror episodes, and that is White Christmas. Yeah, I'm not going to be contrary with this one, I totally get it. This episode is just amazing. Another episode that, just like with Black Museum, focuses on more than one story. There are 3 stories happening in one of the longest episodes that could easily just be a movie on its own. And not only is it amazing how all of the ideas connect and play their role at the end of the episode, but just taking every singular story by itself, they are so well fleshed out. And for me, White Christmas contains possibly the most horrifying concepts they've ever thought of, like true dystopian sociopath shit. From a pick-up artist course where the coach can see whatever you see and guide you by gathering information of your love interest to the spot, to the ability to block a person, which leads to only watching their silhouette and you cannot even talk or listen to them, and the scariest of them all, a cookie as they call it, in which you can trap a digital clone of yourself that can be easily tortured with manipulating time by making for 1 human minute to last like months or years in the mind of the digital conscious, in which they can do nothing at that time. This episode is filled with existential dread and has all of those deeply personal stories filled with intensity, mystery, and there are so many twists back and forth. The moment you get amazed by what side the story goes, it just hits you with another revelation. And while it wasn't the most shocking in terms of its plot twists, the overall execution and the dark turns the story takes was just extremely imaginative, especially the final torture where one of the protagonists have their digital copy trapped for possibly millions of years, playing the same song "I Wish It's Merry Christmas Every Day." It's such a clever touch. Really standout performances from John Hamm and Rafe Spall, and an episode that is just a roller coaster of emotions, just absolutely incredible. And that is all with my ranking of all Black Mirror episodes. Feel free to leave your thoughts of the series down in the comments. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe for more content like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye.